This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 468 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and I'm down in North Glen, Colorado for this episode, and joining me is Chris O'Connor of Prost Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thank you for having me, sir.
It was fun talking with you about non-alcoholic beer a few weeks ago, and we did our deeper dive, our 3-day session on brewing NA beer, because here at this brewery, you brew lots of beer. While Prost is lager focused, you also brew beer for other folks. And so, interestingly enough, while you are a lager fanatic, you are also a process engineer and have a background in this kind of chemical and fluid process. And the brewery that we are sitting in now is pretty remarkable. It's
thank you, sir.
It is a beautiful, beautiful place. In fact, just to my right is a room full of 10 open top fermenters that you use to ferment a lot of those lagers. There's some big horizontal lagering tanks here. Beautiful Kaspar Schulz brew system, behind us. And this brewery is packed with all of the bells and whistles. And it's kind of like a dream thing that you've been able to build here.
It really is kind of a once in a lifetime build. We actually had a colleague ask me if the pictures that were online were actually photoshopped because they didn't believe that it looked that way, which was pretty cool. But no, in real life, the tour that you can give yourself by coming into the beer garden, you see all the same pictures. You can actually see the aspect angle that the photos were taken at. You can look right into the open fermenters and see things working away. They're almost always full at some point in time.
It is absolutely real. And, now this is a convenient stop for me if I'm down in Denver and heading back home to Fort Collins. North Glen's just on the northern end of Denver. And so I've stopped in here to grab some lunch and grab a beer after doing some other stuff. I've run into you sitting down there in the tap room before. And but it's a beautiful spot. And of course, the beer that you are making and the lager beer that you're making out of this facility is also making waves. Been last year at GABF, won gold medals for your Vienna, won a gold medal for your Schwartz beer. Won some Colorado Brewers Cup medals, and along the way, the proof is in the pudding there, and the beers that you're making are making, they are making waves on the national stage. But it's no surprise because, I think as we all know, the key to great lager brewing is in process, and the key is, a lot of the ingredients are the same, but man, dialing that in so that you can make the best quality beer depends on the decisions that you make around how you build the brew house, how you build a process around that, how you approach fermentation. And so we're going to talk about all of that today, these deliberate choices that you have made in order to make the beautiful, beautiful lager that you love to make. Before we do that, the Craft Brewers Conference is coming up April 20th through 23rd, and G&D Chillers will be there. If you are heading to CBC, swing by and talk shop with the folks who know brewery operations inside and out. G&D's biggest strength isn't just the equipment, it's their deep understanding of how a brewery runs. From cellar layout to production flow, their team brings decades of hands-on experience to every install and every conversation. Whether you're running a single-stage 5H unit or scaling up with a vertical air chiller, G&D builds systems that are reliable, efficient, and built to last, because when your chiller's solid, your beer stays cold and your operation stays on track. Plan your visit at gdchillers.com/podcast and come see him at CBC booth 1518. And Berkeley Yeast just launched Dry Tropics London, their best-selling liquid yeast strain, now with the ease of use benefits of dry yeast. Dry Tropics London delivers the soft, pillowy mouthfeel and juicy character you'd expect from a top-tier London ale strain, but with a serious upgrade, a burst of thiols that unleash vibrant, layered notes of grapefruit and passion fruit. A lot of brewers love the clean passion fruit you get from Tropics, but they don't want every IPA to be a tropical fruit bomb. At the dry yeast price point, you can pitch and ditch without breaking the bank, or you can co-pitch with your house strain to adjust the intensity of the notes. And with nationwide free shipping, there's never been a better time to try Dry Tropics. Order now at berkeleyyeast.com and experience the ease and impact of dry tropics London yeast. Also, this episode is sponsored by PakTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PakTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PakTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit paktech-opi.com. That's paktech-opi.com. All right, Chris, we normally kick off with a little bit of background and history. Tell us yours, and also tell us a little bit about the Prost history.
Sure. Grew up in California, but got to Colorado as fast as I could. High school in Fort Collins or Rocky Mountain, and then school at Boulder for chemical engineering. So go Buffs. But also after that, spent about a decade in biotech working for Merck, doing fermentation science development and new product development. My specialty was in tech transfer. So we would basically take what the lab did and then try and get it into the couple tens of thousands of gallons worth of processing. And the physics for that gets pretty entertaining pretty quickly. But it was fun and it was excellent, but I always wanted to be in beer. My senior design project in school was actually for Spetzel Brewing. We worked on their wastewater treatment facility, which was really, really cool. Got to work with brilliant engineer named Jaime Gerardo, who does a lot of technical talks all around the US, works with Master Brewers Associations of America. He's tremendous, but he was my senior thesis advisor, which was hilarious when we worked with him on why we picked the mill that we did, because he's one of the people who was championing endosperm mashing, which is one of the process steps that we chose for this entire facility. And so that 6-roller mill is used for husk separation, and then we only grind the kernel and do all of our saccharification and decoction steps with just the ground kernel. The husk doesn't come in until the very end, right before the lauter. And so helps set the lauter bed, but minimizes the amount of time and temperature that is spent on the husk, so minimizing tannin extraction. We also have seen a pretty significant reduction in polyphenol load by running it that way as well. And so it's been really, really interesting to see. We generate a lot of data out of every process step with the intent to continue to refine the process. Nothing is sacred to me. It's whatever the best process forward is. And we debate it internally regularly.
All right, chemical processing nerd.
Sorry. Yeah. And if anybody is still awake, I am sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And, you can count on me picking your brain more on that because, that's exactly the level of granular detail that we love to get into here. And Jaime, of course, is well known and has been a brewmaster for big brands, in the past and done quite a bit. Tell us a little bit about Prost itself, as a brewery.
Sure. Prost's been around about 13 years now. I came on board about 6 years ago and took part ownership in the company, but my charge was really to kind of change over the brand to where they wanted to be from a quality standpoint. And part of that was designing this production facility. So we spent about 2 years working with co-packers, 3 years actually, working with co-packers, trying to refine the recipes, really kind of develop what we wanted the Prost flavors to be as we moved into the future, because this coincided with the transition from bottles to cans. And so as soon as we made the change to cans, it was an opportunity for us to kind of start changing what people's perceptions of the liquid were. But what we kept running into with every co-packer that we worked with was it was very square peg, round hole. Like their processes were designed for the beers that they made, and those process choices were limiting for us for what we wanted to do, because I had in my mind a method of how I wanted traditional German beer to be made and how it should taste. And we got pretty close with a few of our partners, and we had great partners along the way. They helped us get to where we are today. And so I am eternally grateful for those experiences and the people that I met along the way doing that. But it was very educational, and it actually helped refine a lot of the choices that we made when we designed this brew house and facility in general. Is I wanted something that was hyper focused around making traditional German style beer, but was dynamic enough to be able to handle any kind of process, so that when we had people come in, I didn't have to say, I can't give you what you want because what you're asking me for is not designed into the system. And there are certain challenges associated with that, right? Like trying to be everything to everybody is impossible. And so while we specialize in German beer, some of the areas where you have to start painting outside the line, like if you have Whirlpool hop charges that are in like the 3 pound per barrel load, your efficiency is going to be a little bit worse. It's still a German Whirlpool. It's still designed for smaller hop loads. It's not built for that. But there's ways to design around that, and it's still a highly effective system. But the reason that we went with Kaspar Schulz, who's one of the oldest brewhouse manufacturers in the world, was they didn't try and put us in a box. So a lot of modern brewhouse manufacturers have craft skids that they kind of put you into. It's like, this is our combi cube. This is our, 3-vessel system that you have to work within. But what I wanted to do with our system and the throughput that we were looking for out of it didn't allow us to be put in a box, right? And so we went full custom with Kaspar Schulz. It's a one-of-a-kind brew house, and there's a lot of little design tweaks that we ended up putting in very specifically with Kaspar Schulz help. So one of the things, it's a really small thing, it's very simple, is in the mash mixers, instead of a prop blade that you see, like usually it looks like an airplane prop, like a twin propeller. What you get with that when you start spinning it really quick is a lot of tip shear. You start shredding the wort and start killing protein. What I designed in was closer to what we used to do with mammalian cell fermentation, which is a marine blade design, and it's staggered out. So they're all pitched and it's all soft edges. So at really low RPM, you get incredibly high turnover volumes. So you don't have to run it at a really high speed to get really effective mixing. And that also,
so the blades themselves have some sort of like twist or turn in them.
They're almost kind of like pitched at a 45-degree angle, and then all of it looks like a kind of soft edge, almost like the blade of a boat.
Yeah, I can. When you say marine, I can think about a boat propeller and the smooth edges in that versus the kind of hard metal edges in a typical rake and a mash tun.
Exactly. And so that was kind of the design intent. That's in both the decoction kettle and in the brew kettle, the mash kettle itself. And so when we come in to those processing steps, you get a very, very gentle mixing and a very, very equal mixing. So you don't get cooking from the outsides of the jacketed tanks. So it's all steam. That's not direct inject. It's all jacketed steam. One of the reasons I didn't want to go with the direct inject steam is because if your water quality starts fluctuating, if you don't have a consistent water source or consistent water treatment, you can start getting flavor taint from your steam. And so I wanted to minimize the amount of impact from things that I wouldn't be able to control to an absolute level. And so one of the through lines for the entire facility that you'll see is process control and process monitoring, because if you don't observe a process, you can't control it. And so our level of engagement with the product throughout its life cycle is highly interactive. And we have traceability from grain producer to finished can lot all the way through. And that's, for better or worse, the only way I know how to interact with the process. I've shown people like how I track and trend all the different beers that we make, and they think I'm a crazy person, and they're right to think so. But it's numbers and then feedback on sensory are the only ways I know how to engage with the process.
Well, if you cut your teeth in biopharma, then where that traceability and process is just so crucial. I can understand that. Well, explain, talk about the system in general.
Sure.
What it is, volumes, vessels, and how you have it set up, because clearly you've spent a lot of time nerding out on this custom system. And so, like, let's look under the hood of your hot rod for a minute.
Sure. So the owner David DeDeline and I probably designed this brewery and then ripped up the designs at least a dozen times before we committed to a final form. And one of the reasons that it was built the way that it was is that there was a lot of scientific literature around a lot of these individual components that suggested a product improvement and at incremental levels. And so the idea and what I kind of pitched to the board was, what would happen if you consistently layered all of these incremental improvements to wort and green beer and maturation beer processing on top of each other? What would you end up with? Do all of it end up to something that's excellent, or do they start fighting each other? And so that was kind of the genesis of how we built it. That's why we
spent a lot of money to find out.
Yeah, exactly. It's as I like to tell people, test the hypothesis and observe the result, which is just a nicer way of saying fuck around and find out. It's kind of what we did. But the Kunzel mill behind me is a 6-roller mill with a screw hydration system on it. So what you do is you mist the outside of the kernel. And so it has an easier pull from the first 2 rollers. The first 2 rollers will pull it off of the kernel. And then there's an air system that blows the husk into a separate collection container. And then the next 2 sets of rollers are where you get your fine grind, right? And so we used a chain-based system that was designed by Kunzel to feed into a grist hydrator. It's called an Optimasher, which is a kind of an off-the-shelf thing from Kaspar Schulz. And then there's a chute on the inside of the mash mixer that sends it down the side so you don't directly hit the water like straight in. Try and minimize the amount of hot side aeration as much as possible without feeding it from the bottom, which presents its own challenges. The decoction kettle was more for flavor development on our end. We decoct everything for Prost. The lighter lagers are usually flash decoction, and then the darker beers are usually double decoction. The wheat originally was triple, but I think my brewers were ready to mutiny. And so we moved that to a double decoction because the mash cycle is starting to get a little absurd. But it is still about a 8-step mash. I mean, we go through full ferulic acid rest, phytase rest, like beta-glucan rest, alpha-amylase rest. Like we step through the whole thing and kind of keep it moving. But we think we get a really, really well-developed flavor from doing all of those things. Honestly, I was following kind of Eric Toft on Schoenraumer on how he was doing his Pilsner recipe for like the lighter lagers, and it's like following those mash profiles to a certain extent because Schoenraumer is one of my favorite beers. It's one of my favorite breweries in Germany. Beer is amazing. It's a great benchmark. But post that, you go into a fully automated lauter, and so it's basically measuring a differential pressure and flow rate the entire way through. The system itself is controlled by a pretty high degree of automation, and a lot of information gets registered throughout. So the brewers are there basically taking readings on every single step the entire way. And so our brewhouse tracking logs are robust. It's kind of a trust but verify. You know the system works, but make sure that it's working the way that it's supposed to. A wort receiver, and then it goes to a boil kettle with a heat stack recovery. So the steam actually is used to heat the hot liquor tank. It's funny. This Kaspar Schulz system, the 60 hectoliter system, is more energy efficient and takes less energy to run than the 25 hectoliter system that I have as my pilot. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
But that, I mean, it's just a steam hog, but it's pretty cool. But part of the reason for that is that the boil kettle is designed to be a low simmer boil. So we don't have a raging boil like you see for most people where you evaporate like 6%, 5-6% on a regular. We only evaporate about 2.5% in the boil kettle. And the reason for that is that after the whirlpool, it goes through a process called a vacuum boiling system. It was called a shoko. And that is one of the only ones in the lower 48 currently. I think Kaspar might have sold another one, and I think it was to Sierra Nevada. But basically what the vacuum boiling does is that water boils at a lower temperature under vacuum. And so post whirlpool, you're still above about 190 Fahrenheit. And so once it goes into there, it goes through this really, really fine spreader. So you get a really, really thin membrane layer. So the separation of organic volatiles is super easy. And so all your DMS precursor can come off there. We get about 3% there, ending up around anywhere between 5 to 6% evaporation rate on pretty much everything, depending on what you want to run. And you can tune that. So if you want to increase the amount of vacuum, you want to strip more, you can. If you want to reduce it because you want it to taste a little bit more like Rolling Rock, you can. Like it's just depends on what you want to do, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that's where like that customizable aspect of what we were doing kind of fits in. And that even comes down to what it feeds into next, which is the yeast propagation. So Esau Huber did a 2 hectoliter, 20 hectoliter yeast prop for us. And then we have 4 additional propagation tanks that are all about 8 hectoliters. And so we can store yeast from in process and then regrow it in some of those propagators, but we can also do true step up if we really wanted to. We manage anywhere between 6 yeast strains at a time. But that prop system is highly efficient and very, very effective. And it's in line with the brew house into the open fermentation suite that we talked about a couple seconds ago. There's 10 120 hectoliter open fermenters in a custom design clean room. This is where the Germans called me crazy. They didn't think I needed it. Because when you go into their open fermentation suites, it's just in a room. You walk in and street clothes right off the...
Shinram does not have
no.
A closed air system, no. Positive pressure.
Their head brewer literally reached in and grabbed some of the Kreuzen. It's like, yeah, here, smell it. And I was like, what? Like food safety? No, it's fine. At any rate, it freaked me out. I couldn't handle it. My OCD couldn't process that level of lack of control. And so we actually put this in a positive pressure room on a separate section of the HVAC going through a HEPA filter. And so this actually could test at about a class 10,000 room. So for like medical device assembly, it's about the same standard. The lab is the only way in, and it's all access controlled with basically like key cards. And so you have to go through a specialized training for gowning, which is a full clean room gowning setup. So like Tyvek suits, hair nets, beard nets, glasses, the whole nine. And that's just to access the room in general. And the lab functions like an airlock. So if that door opens, air pushes into the lab, not into the room. If the lab door is open and the production door is open, everything pushes out, nothing pushes in. And so that's kind of how we keep it.
Two-stage positive pressure in both of the rooms.
Exactly.
All right.
And it's all single direction flow. So all the air coming into the room comes in through the ceiling and it pushes down at the floor level. So you don't get any recirculation. So if you had an RTU at the top trying to return air through the top, you would actually get particle recirculation. This drives everything down and out. And so any of the CO2 that's produced in the room actually kind of helps create an additional protective layer for the top of the open fermentation vessels and drives everything down through those louvers that are in the bottom corners. And so it's able to maintain an aseptic environment in a process that doesn't necessarily lean towards aseptic processing, which was fun to explain to an auditor, but this is great. We got the GMP cert anyway, so it's fine. But these will usually get blended into a 240 hectoliter horizontal. So there's 8 240 hectoliter horizontals, 2 120 hectoliter horizontals, 10 120 hectoliter cylinder conicals, 10 240 hectoliter cylinder conicals, 4 75 hectoliter cylinder conicals, and then 4 50 hectoliter cylinder conicals. And so the smaller tanks are usually for development batches or like taproom only stuff. But the production beers almost exclusively go through the horizontals. One of the cool things about that is actually it ties into a CO2 recovery system that we purchased from Earthly Labs. We actually probably need more bulk CO2 storage capabilities from the system. So that's part of the upgrades that we're looking at
You're
next.
producing too much CO2 now.
Yep. So to be able to reuse all of it to try and offset about like 80% of the total CO2 need, we would need a larger storage unit. And so that was an oversight on my part, but I had good problems, I guess. We are then processing it through either a coarse filtration or a fine filtration. So coarse filtration goes through a GA HBS1 centrifuge, or it'll go through the Pentair BMF crossflow. And so basically if it's supposed to be hazy, it can go through the fuge, or you can just rack direct. Or if you need polish filtration, the Pentair is about a 0.5 micron nominal. So anything that's supposed to be clear is clear. I mean, you got to see it. Nobody on the podcast can see it, but trust me, beer is very clear.
Yes, the Salus is very clear.
That then goes through additional Pentair equipment. It's a carbo blending skid that's tied into a deaerated water column. And so you can actually trim to a target alcohol at the outlet. If somebody were to brew at a higher ABV, you could set an outlet ABV target and it would pull the amount of deaerated water necessary to trim the alcohol into spec while carbonating it to the bright tank. The bright tank is actually ready to package faster than it takes for me to run PCR to clear it for micro, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, but the lab is engaged at every aspect of the process. We have a master sampling plan that makes most people freak out because it's a lot of testing. But everybody who makes beer here follows it because I don't give them an option not to. My quality standard gets to be everybody's quality standard for better or worse. But when we release product from the bright tank, making sure it met all the specifications that we allowed, it goes into either the KHS can filler. It's a 21.3, 245 cans a minute with a HEPA filtered lid. Or it goes into the combi keg unit from KHS. It does about 60 kegs an hour. And then post that, it ends up in 9,000 square feet of cold storage. And so it's all in site, it's all in house. We try and do as much sourcing as we possibly can for everybody that we do business with. It's really a one-stop shop. It's pretty spectacular.
So you're producing a lot of beer out of this. You're going to hit maybe 100,000 barrels this year, and Prost is a portion of that. But a lot of that is also beer that you make, and not just beer, but also other beverages, alcoholic beverages, non-alcoholic beverages. For other manufacturers. Even though the soul of Prost is still here in this German lager world.
It really is to fund something of this scope would require a lot more volume than Prost was making. And so contract brewing was always going to be part of it. And that's why we designed it with contract brewing in mind, kind of first and foremost. That's why the flexibility, it's why the different batch sizes. We saw an opening in the space really for like the 5 to 20,000 barrel a year client range, even up to like the 40,000 barrel a year client range that wasn't being met out in the market. And so from development to commercial processing, you can do all of it here and trust that the results were what you were asking for.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about how you then make and apply some of this extensive engineering into the actual lagers and award-winning lagers that you make. Before we do that, taste the flavors of indie hops at CBC this year in Philly. 14 incredible beers will showcase Strata, Luminosa, Lorien, Audacia, plus their most promising new experimental hop IH19082 in a single hop XPA. Experience their newest hop Audacia in an IPA by Grand Fir, a hoppy lager by Meanwhile, and a hazy by Worthy Brewing. Explore the wonders of Strata and IPAs from Odell, Russian River, and Grains of Wrath, and Grand Fir, and refresh your palate with the crisp, summery flavors of Lorien, and an Italian Pils by Sun River, and a Mexican lager by Holdout, and bask in the liquid sunshine magic of Luminosa with an IPA from Fort George. Check out the full CBC beer lineup at www.indiehops.com and plan to stop by their booth number 926. You may even find me there. They'll be as happy to see you as you'll be that you made the effort. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And if you're like many podcast listeners, you've got a lot of beers at home and your regular fridge is at capacity. Enter the Midea 50/50 Flex, the industry's first dual compartment, 3-way convertible freezer. Here's what all that means for you. Options. The 50/50 has the power to be all freezer, all fridge, or a little bit of both, but you'll probably want to use those 20 cubic feet as a massive garage-ready beer fridge. You can also change which side the door is on and how you want the shelves to be arranged. The 50/50 totally flexes to fit your life. Plus, it's designed to maintain a stable temperature even in non-climate controlled conditions, so you can crack a cold one even in the warmest days in the man cave. Take your garage to the next level. Check out midea.com/US to get more information about this game changer today. And the Beyond Beer space is booming, and Old Orchard is here for it, supplying breweries with the fruit ingredients for all of your beverage needs. Low to no alcohol, hard lemonades, seltzer, cider, and more. Old Orchard has supplied hundreds of industrial customers across 49 states, including nationally and internationally loved brands. So you'll be in good company. More information and free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. So, Chris, you go to all of this trouble to build this incredible brewery from the ground up here in North Glen. And the goal, obviously, is flexibility, but there's a significant amount of investment in all of the things that are very specific to the kind of lager that you want to make. And, as you said at the top, that goal is to make noteworthy lager and, then use that process to kind of differentiate and make it fantastic. So, when it came to recipes and how you were going to design those kinds of lagers, talk about that creative process. Clearly you're inspired, by specific breweries like Shinram, in Germany and in Bavaria. So how do you take some of that inspiration and then start turning it into recipes for the beers that you're going to make here?
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to stick with as authentic of an experience as humanly possible, like trying to recreate the beers that I've had while I was in Germany, like learning from the brewmasters there, talking to them about what they use, how they use it, working with our vendors who have a lot of intimate knowledge of a lot of those processings and kind of gaining that insight has been helpful. But one of the other things that's been super useful is I lean very heavily on our team. We have a wonderful group of people that work here. They're actually probably one of the most critical parts of the design process. The amount of intellectual horsepower in this building is really, really impressive. And so when we go through recipe designs and we go through recipe changes, it's actually a group process. So while I'll usually retain like final say over what ends up happening, because at the end of the day, it's my responsibility, I source information from all these people because their experiences, their input is so valuable, because I see beer in the world through a certain lens, but the more perspective that I can gain on how they see authentic German beer and how they see what those flavors need to present as, it really steers the conversation towards, okay, I see what you're looking for and I want this aspect of it. What if we layer flavors in this way? And it's hard in German beer because it's a pretty limited set of ingredients that go into traditional beer. Like Pilsner is Pilsner malt and, noble hops. It's not a lot of room to play.
Right.
And so that's why process and execution are really what differentiate. And so the professionals who work here take an immense amount of pride in execution and reproducibility, and it shows in every aspect of what they do. And so the process steps that we do are constantly being refined, and we see it in the finished beer, even down to things like changing yeast strains in the middle of the year, which we did. We ran an event here where we actually trialed one wort with 3 different yeast strains to see what people would vote on as their favorite, which was hilarious. The data was useless. It was like, it was an even split 3 ways. Like if you looked at it, you would just be like, this is a complete waste of time. Why don't we do this? But then you look at the sales data and one was like 4-1 against the others. And it's just like, okay.
So their expressed preference varied greatly from the actual sales data.
Exactly. And so like we poured all of them blind to people. They just had 3 options. It was trial 1, trial 2, trial 3. We told nobody what it was. It was a completely blind thing. And so when they were tasting him, we had some really creative responses. Somebody thought that we dry hopped one of them. One of them thought that we ran like a completely different hop load. People had a lot of different ideas. And these are a lot of them are industry
people, right.
And so
and there's not an industry person that doesn't want to flex their own knowledge for you in a scenario like that.
100%. And they should.
They're going to guess. They're going to make their guesses.
Yeah, exactly. I'm usually just going like, I don't know. Like that's something tells me it was probably one of these 3 things, but you tell me. But I think that because it was truly blind, because it was 3 very different performing yeasts in the exact same system, processed at exactly the same time, same maturation windows.
What were the yeasts that you used in this?
It was the Bayern Lager strain from Omega was one of them. It was 3470, and then it was a kind of a Czech lager strain. It was like a hybrid Czech lager strain that we use internally. And so it was pretty funny to see how they all performed it, like even down to performance specs. Like the attenuations were almost all identical, which was pretty cool to see. But the sulfur levels were wildly different. The Czech lager strain was in like the 3 part per million range. The Bayern lager strain was around like 9, and then the 3470 was around like 8, around there. So they were close enough. But the way that the Bayern lager and the 3470 presented in terms of their sulfur was wildly different. Like it was a struck match versus like almost something that amplified some of the hop and malt characteristics from the Bayern lager strain. And I think 3470 is a wonderful yeast, and we use it in a lot of different things. So all of our darker beers still run 3470, but for the lighter beers, I wanted to have something that really amplified the hop contributions and didn't take away from it. Like we really wanted to kind of create a harmony where everything was singing together and there wasn't one piece trying to fight the other. And I thought that was kind of the glue that really pulled that in. The Czech lager strain was great. It just didn't have the highest sales rate. And it was funny because after the event, after everybody measured it and did their judging, it was an even split. Again, the data was useless, but the sales pull-through rate told the story. It was like 4-1 for the Bayern lager strain versus anything else. And then we put all the kegs on for sale in the beer gardens because we had to move through it. I mean, it's still a lot of beer. But the Bayern lager strain sold. It was gone in a week. Everything else took like 2 to 3 weeks per pull. And so like it was what, again, in the pursuit of something that is undeniable, that was the closest indicator of something that was undeniably good, and it was undeniably chosen by people at a higher clip than anything else.
Could you look at that sales? I'm curious about that because there's two different ways that can be. That can be like a larger volume of first beer sales where, where people see some differentiating thing in the naming of that sounds like it's going to be better than the other three. And that might have put a thumb on the scale.
Sure.
But then there's also that metric of, oh, wait, we sold more second beers of that one where we only sold one of the other ones, or we sold more third beers of that one than we sold second beers, like comparatively. And so if you have, you can also dive into that data, sales data, and unlock the magic. Like, was this the beer that people just wanted to keep drinking?
Absolutely. There's a lot of strength in looking at all that data. And then you tie that back to the way that it was being described in sensory. Like when you looked at the tasting notes that were provided, so less so than the percent split of each one being even, the way that people were describing the beers was more useful than anything else, because that allowed us to apply it towards those lighter beers, because like, okay, these flavors that are being discussed that are almost exclusively being driven by yeast play super well into this space. And so we're going to use it here because this is how we design recipes. Right. And so like for things like the Helles, we were talking about it earlier, is like, I want that perfect push-pull between fullness, multi-sweetness, and hop characteristics, but they have to sit there and exist in balance and then be very, very present, but then almost immediately gone. It's like perfect amount of small talk, right? It's like, but that's kind of how we design all of those sorts of beer. Like Pils leans a little bit more towards hops, but that's just by design, and it should. Like you really want that to lead the way, but it still doesn't take away from a lot of those pretty grassy floral cracker components from the Pilsner malt itself. And so when we look at the design, when we look at those choices, we'll move things around in recipe design to really amplify certain aspects of what we do. Because Colorado, people like hops. It's a thing, so having a Pilsner that leans a little hop forward doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. It certainly doesn't hurt mine. But it's a stylistic choice, and there's a lot of ways to play that. So what practically, you did this testing, and then what did that actually mean then for your pale lagers? It then pushed you into a pretty broad redesign of pale lagers then. Yeah, we had a very robust debate about what we wanted to do moving forward. The room was honestly kind of split because people have their preferences one way or the other, but at the end of the day, we ended up doing a wholesale recipe design change on Helles. Pilsner had a pretty decent overhaul. And these are beers that have already like won awards in the space and were being like received very, very well. But to me, it wasn't perfect, right? It wasn't an undeniable beer. And I wanted undeniable. It's what I want. I say it all the time to my team. I know they hate me for it. I don't care. It is a base instinct that when you have something that is good, like you can't not admit that it's good, right? Like even if you don't want to, like when you're arguing with your sister-in-law about something and you're like, but damn it, you're right, and this is really good. You have to be able to say it in spite of whether or not you want to. And so like, I want to make something that people recognize as being of the highest quality. That is the goal for the company. That is my goal for everybody. It's the standard that we set every product in that we make to. It's like, it has to be that, or it doesn't stop getting refined. The process should be iterative and it should never stop, because the perfect beer, the best beer in the world, has never been made, right? So like, why stop pursuing it? And raw materials are going to change every single year. Hops are going to change every single year. If you're not moving your process to accommodate those subtle changes, your product is going to change no matter what. So why not change it with intention? Yeah. So what is, in a practical sense, what did changing this mean? You decide to switch all of your pale lagers over from 3470 to Augustiner 6 months ago. And, but that also means like rethink, like you're a process geek. Mm-hmm. That meant a lot of different processes for you to make sure that
you were now treating this yeast the way that it needed to be treated versus the way that 3470 needs to be treated, the way that you think about all the other inputs, the way that malt plays with that,
Sure.
To also create the kind of flavors that you're looking for. Talk to me about some of those cascading effects that came from that.
Sure. It really changed you basically reset the cycle of experimentation, right? Like we had 1.5 years worth of data on 3470 for everything, but we had one data point for this to work off of. And so after every batch that's run, we look at all the numbers from a performance standpoint. We're tasting all these beers to line them up with them. And then we make process changes. So like we've adjusted the cellar profile. Knockout a little bit lower, but the free raise is a little bit more extreme. We increased the pitch rate by about 50% because we thought that was going to give us a healthier fermentation. We even changed the amount of time that it was sitting in the open fermentation suite before we moved it to the horizontals and we started spunding. And so that whole timing changed based off of that feedback from the first couple of runs. And it doesn't stop. After every batch, we still look at the culmination of all of that information and then make a decision on what needs to be adjusted next to keep refining. And that's all the way back to wort production at every step, from like mash mixer, like impeller speeds, to oxidation rates, to evaporation rate targets, to where we put the hops. Like if we think that it's missing mid palate, like do we move some of these hop charges up about 5 to 10 minutes to try and give it a little bit more time to isomerize? Because making beer in Colorado at higher altitude, you have a lower isomerization rate because the temperature is lower. And so you have to compensate somewhere for that. Boiling at a lower temperature for low simmer also impacts the isomerization rate. So you have to take that into account when you start talking about scaling recipes or refining them, knowing where you're actually going to get contribution versus not. Because after the whirlpool, you go through the Shoko, the amount of isomerization you get at a end of boil hop and whirlpool hop is significantly lower than what you would expect. And so it's, again, where do you position and what do you value in terms of a finished product? And so all of these things get taken into account and they're always tweaked, and they're going to continue to get tweaked, which I know drives my supply chain manager crazy, but it's not going to stop. But we changed the amount of maturation time that we were spending in the horizontals. We thought that we were actually running a little bit too long. We had product that was going out about 50 days in maturation, and we wanted to keep it around 35 to 40 instead.
Too much lagering.
We did see a value. At a certain point in time, we actually started to see a degradation in head retention, and which you don't want in any of the beers. And so part of that could have been yeast health. A lot of that experimentation was taking place at lower pitch rates. And so you could have had issues with the yeast kind of struggling throughout maturation and having that kind of an impact. We didn't see it in any of the fan levels increasing throughout maturation, which we were also measuring. And so it wouldn't indicate autolysis or anything like that. pHs were all really stable. But if you're wasting an additional like 10 to 12 days for no added benefit and potentially degradation, why? So but again, it all comes down to proofs in the pudding. You make the change. If it had the impact that you were looking for and continues to have the impact you were looking for, then it was a good decision. If it's the wrong decision, then you go back. like you're not always going to get it right. And that's why I keep on saying it's going to be iterative. It's always going to be iterative. But
so what has been the real life effect then for Helles in terms of, sensory and achieving that undeniability?
Sure.
How have these process changes impacted the way that you taste and that the team tastes that beer? And what do you think some of those, key points of differentiation have become?
I think for me personally, and for all of us here, I kind of reinforce that I'm not looking for a true to type for our beer. I'm looking for improvement, or like, what are we doing to make it better? Like, I don't care if it hit what it was. That's not important to me. Like, what are we doing in our processes? What are we changing to make this better? And that actually led to a full redesign of the Helles recipe entirely, from malt bill to the types of hops that we used to the yeast strain that we used. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't hitting traditional. It wasn't the beer that it was supposed to be. And
what'd you do with malt? What'd you do with malt on that?
So we
imagine this is still Bavarian malt.
No, we're not throwing honey malt in it or anything.
Yeah, of course.
It's like it's still just Pilsner malt and Carahel. That's all it is now. But what it was before was there was a little bit of Munich in there because we thought we wanted a small bread characteristic to it to give it a little bit more depth of flavor from the malt. But I think we were only doing that because the 3470 that we were using was presenting such a pronounced sulfur note that it was taking away from that softness of the malt characteristic. It was almost making it sharp. And so we were almost adding sweetness to fight the bite instead of fixing the real problem, which was the way the sulfur was presenting. And so the yeast change was a big part of that. And it allowed us to take the Munich malt out of it and then lean fully on Carahel and Pilsner malt. And it still drinks very full without it being heavy. It's still light on the palate. It's a very, very dynamic beer without it being overwhelming, which is kind of a struggle in lighter style beers, is to create something that is interesting, and you could dissect it if you really wanted to, but you could also just sit there and enjoy. And that those two principles seem like they should fight each other, but the reality is that they don't need to. You can make something that's refreshing and requires no thought. And you could also have that same thing be something that if you wanted to dig into the subtleties of it and how it presents, you could spend, I mean, if you're me and you're a nerd, hours talking about how things get there.
Or the rest of your life for that matter.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And keep pulling it apart, right? Like,
sure.
Like,
but no, when I was tasting it, I mean, there's, there's this malt fullness, but also a nice definition to it, and that it doesn't come across as sweet, and somehow, it has a precision to it that I think, lends it to that kind of long-term drinkability, and means, you still can drink the second and third one and maybe a fourth and, and still keep going with it. But it also felt like there was something to it, and it wasn't this minimalist beer experience where, it wasn't a beer that just disappeared from you. You took a sip and you kind of like, oh, I like that. Right. Like it does evoke some of that. Oh, yeah, that's good.
I mean, at a certain point, there's got to trigger an emotional response, right? For you to either buy it off the shelf or actually choose to buy it again, it needs to trigger some sort of an emotional response. Like, it can't just be, sex in a canoe, right? You have to actually feel something about this.
Sure. Well, let's talk about Pilsner next. I want to talk about, how this revised sulfur profile impacted when you start adding even more hops in. But before we do that, today's episode is brought to you by ADM. Are you ready to shake things up in the beverage world? ADM is passionate about helping you craft your next breakthrough. From cutting-edge natural ingredients like hops to advanced technologies, ADM brings together science and creativity to elevate taste, quality, and recipe design. Whether you're developing a beer innovation or a bold new flavor experience, ADM is your trusted partner in innovation. Let's create something extraordinary, because the future of beer and brewing starts with inspired ideas and exceptional expertise. ADM is where nature meets precision. Learn more at adm.com/alcohol. And running a brewery means juggling a lot, managing production, serving guests, selling online, and keeping everything moving behind the scenes. That's where Arrived comes in. What started as a point-of-sale system has grown into the technology your brewery runs on, built specifically for the teams behind great beer. Unlike generic systems, Arrived brings together taproom service, online sales, brewery management, payments, reporting, and growth tools into one complete platform. So instead of bouncing between systems, you can brew, serve, and sell all in one place. See it in action at CBC 2026, booth 1626, or visit Arrived, ARRYVED.com to learn more. Also, pumps are critical to any advanced homebrewing setup, from mash recirculation to wort transfer, and even for cleaning. A quality pump is a key part of every brew day. The SS Brew Pump from SS Brewtech is engineered to tackle even the messiest brew days. Featuring an IP55 water resistance rating, an easy-to-use DIN head with 360-degree rotation, and a flow rate of up to 11 gallons per minute, it has the power to keep your brew day moving. Visit ssbrewtech.com/pump to learn more about how the SS Brew Pump can upgrade your home brewery. All right, let's talk about Pilsner now, Chris. You've, obviously now you've chosen Augustiner because you like that profile, but of course the sulfur and the way that that interacts with hops, especially in something like Pilsner, again, changes everything. And now 6 months ago, you're back to basics and experimenting again to get this other, award-winning beer that people love back, well, shouldn't say back, because your goal is not to repeat the same thing you were already at. Your goal is to make it even better.
Right. And I think the change to the new strain is going to help with that a lot. It already did. The batch that won silver at Colorado Cup took second to my winter lager, and it was funny because the winter lager ran 3470, but the Pilsner was the first trial batch that we ran the Augustiner through.
And the first trial batch won a medal.
Yeah.
All right. Not too bad. Not too bad.
Pilsner had been going through a drought, man. It'd been a couple of years since we made it like all the way to the medal round. So it was nice to see that the change.
I don't think
I
judged that category. I did judge the Colorado Brewers Cup this year, but I don't think I was doing pale lager then.
No, that was Jake. Westbound Jake was at that table.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
But
he's okay.
Yeah, he's good. He does pretty well. I think he just count on 5-6 medals for them every single year. That's not bad. That's gotta be a good feeling. But yeah, no, it's been really, really fun to see, because without that presentation of like a very masculine sulfur note from the 3470, you had more opportunity to start highlighting some of the prettier florals from some of the hop choices. So we were able to move the late charge back to where it was because we weren't trying to create as much mid palate. We were able to change the fermentation specs so we could attenuate further without fear of over drying on top of that and creating something that was astringent. So we actually changed the entire mash recipe to accommodate the new yeast strain. And so it really was
and dried it out a little bit.
Yeah. And so we really overhauled the entire design concept while still staying true to what a German Pilsner should taste like. And still tasting like the way Prost Pilsner tastes. But it's like, it was all of the things about Prost Pilsner that people liked, and it was none of the things that probably prevented them from buying a third. And so with this, even though it is still around, almost like 1.8 pounds per barrel of hops and like 30 plus IBU, it doesn't drink bitter.
No, not at all.
You get a lot of hop flavor, but it's not a lot of hop bite, and so I think that that's a really nice balance between the really, really elegant Pilsner malt characteristics, and it's that really nice level of grassy and floral that you want out of a Pilsner. It almost drinks like there's a hint of like little bit of bready cracker notes to it on the back end, and then it finishes very, very crisp, very, very clean. And that's how I wanted our Pilsner to taste. And we're going to continue to play with it because we just got our new hops. And so that means redefine how the recipe is made. The alphas were like 1.5% higher. So all the charges have to change. And so it never stops. Every year is a new adventure. And the process of constantly shifting where we're putting hops, how much we're putting in, how we're controlling fermentation to play with those new hop characteristics, it's just going to be a constant.
Yeah, for sure. So same kind of, is this like a Environment Pilsner malt? Or?
Oh yeah. It's all. I mean,
I could just kind of assume that.
Oh yeah. So I mean, you see all the super sacks. Yeah. It's like we take containers at a time of super sacks environment. But the nice thing is that we get pre-blends from them. So I basically send them my recipe, and one big bag ends up being 1 60 hectoliter turn through the brewhouse, which is great. Minimizes variability, especially through performance. So another control step that's used to minimize the amount of variability in the finished product. But when you order like 8 of them at a time, that means you're locked in for the next 400 barrels, right? It's going to be what it's going to be. You can play with other things, but the malt's going to be what the malt's going to be. We run almost exclusively extra pale. I like the lightness of it.
Yeah.
I think that it performs incredibly well through the lauter. There's some carafoam in it, and there's a little bit of acidulated, but it's really just that. It's kind of a simple design, to be honest. And then the hops are almost exclusively middle fruit. There's a little bit of tet and there's a little bit of select in there, but those are more like accent marks. So if you're like kind of coloring around the sides, it's pretty close to a smash beer. But what separates it is how it's made. The process that it goes through, the time that it takes, the attention to the detail at every single one of the process steps is really what's helping it separate from the other beers that we make.
Did your middle brew selection change at all now with inspired or directed by the way that it expresses with this yeast now?
Yeah, I mean, we discuss internally as a leadership team what we want the hop characteristics to present as. And so when we go out to selection, we go out with something in mind. It's still agricultural product. You have a certain amount of things to pick from, and you kind of end up getting what you get to a certain extent. And it's
especially since you're talking about German grown hops imported into the US.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so it's when you're there, you're smelling it, you're like, it's hard to separate yourself from the experience because it is so pretty. Like the entire landscape and like all the different farms you go to it's hard to like maintain objectivity. And like kind of like remove yourself from where you are and be like, oh wait, yeah, no, I'm doing this in the Hallertau. That's pretty awesome. And like at every single one of the farms, every single one of the locations, you have all your notes, right? You're sitting there like trying to write everything down, but you have beers at every single one of the stops. So like by the fifth one, you're like, I don't know, it kind of smells like beer. Like, but I would say that
it's like Eric Toft has said to me before: if you can't get drunk with your hop grower, then can you really do business with them?
Exactly, and they never disappoint in that regard. So it is always a great time. That's why I really make sure I pick the ones that require the majority of our volume first, and then some of the flavor ones later. So middle brew almost always gets selected first, and our select too. Our select is chosen because it doesn't taste the way that most people think select is supposed to taste. Like that cotton candy color kind of character you get from it is non-existent. It's a really intense herbal characteristic that is a great blending hop for nobles. Like it really adds a lot of depth of flavor to the beers that we make. But the middle brew, I lean very heavy on floral. Like I want it to be really, really bright. I want it to be almost like a bouquet in your face, because the tradition that we choose is almost always slightly spicy. So it's still floral, but like a little bit more of that spice component, because I think that holds up really well against some of the sweeter beers that we make. So like things that have a little bit more residual sugar, things that carry a little bit more malt flavor, that sweet and spice blend creates a really, really nice balance. And that's really how we approach design it for everything here. It's like, is the pursuit of balance. That balance can lean one way or the other, but it should still exist in harmony, right? And that's really, really kind of the pursuit of every single one of the designs. And again, it's fun to be able to debate those types of choices with people who have the refined palates that we have here, who have the freedom of opinion and the willingness to share it. And I think those constructive conversations are what have led the development of the brand over the last 9 months to become significantly improved over where it was. And I thought that the beer was great 9 months ago. And I think it's even further than it was then, like at leaps and bounds, honestly. And it's nice because every batch people have really bought into the like everyday better mentality, right? Like every day, how do we do this step better? Every day, how do we do this process better? How do we make this beer better? Like, and it's constantly moving those ideas forward and then having an actual conversation about it. And it's really fun to see. And I think it's a rarity from places that I've been before. It's usually like, I am the master brewer. What is your opinion? I'm like, no, like no one ever asks you that. Right. And so at the end of the day, it's my call. And at the end of the day, I'm presenting a lot of the ideas, but I want them challenged. I am not always right. Honestly, I'm very rarely right. Just ask my wife. But it really
sure.
But
well, I think, there's a culture here, particularly in this kind of greater Denver area. And, the folks like, there's a great podcast episode with Hutch and Jonathan of Cannonball Creek, where they talk about the same exact thing, changing their medal winning recipes. Yeah. And, and there is absolutely that culture of never resting on your laurels and always needing to be, skating to puck where the puck is going to be rather than to where the puck is.
Yeah.
And because consumer tastes are always moving in that way too. And there's always some way to do that. And so, I mean, from a company perspective, like you've got a lot riding on that. You guys have, are producing 6-packs and 12-ounce cans that are out there at competitive price points in in retail environments. And there's an expectation, you got a lot invested and a lot riding on this. Like, don't screw it up. Yeah, it's different than a small brew pub that's selling everything over their own bar. But
that's very true. But the realities of that is that if the failures happen, it's because I chose it, right? Like at the end of the day, it stops with me. Somebody came up with an idea and I heard it and I liked it and I made the call to use it. So at no point in time, if something fails, is it anyone on my team's fault? It's mine. And so they all know that, which is why when they come to me with ideas, they know that I'm not going to say, well, you wanted to do this. It's a waste of everybody's time. I decided to do it because at the end of the day, it's my call, better or worse. So if the beer sucks, it's my fault. But if the beer is great, it's because we all had input into it and then we all executed against that vision. It really is a team effort. It's actually one of the reasons I don't go to the medal ceremony is because I can't bring my entire team.
That's fair. Let's talk about the dynamics of open top fermentation, especially between 3470 and Augustiner.
Yeah.
Since this is kind of a core component, and you have this very, very technically advanced, expensive room that you've built here to do this. How obviously these yeasts, both of those yeasts, do well in this no head pressure environment.
Yep.
And how. Between the two of them, how did some of those fermentation dynamics change as you made some of that switch?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. So our cellar manager and our yeast plant manager both have had a lot of input on how we should be handling these strains and handling like the fermentations in these rooms. And so I had an idea when we started, but it's constantly being refined by the people that have to touch it every day, right? And so both of their inputs have allowed us to make pretty small adjustments. But one of the things about these fermenters is that it's not a traditional 3-to-1 aspect ratio. So it's not 3 high to 1 wide. It's actually 2-to-1. And so one of the things that you have to manage, especially with elevated pitch rates and you could run into a situation where you're running warmer temperatures, is esterification, because that aspect ratio is designed to promote esterification. So that's why you see it mostly with Hefeweizen fermentation for open top. So we have that for the back 4. They're all designed for ale, but the front 6 are all lager. But that kind of shorter, squattier aspect ratio creates a very gentle environment. So if you start running it too hot, or if you start producing too much oxygen through your oxygenation at knockout, you start really driving a significant amount of fruit ester. And so if you're trying to get something that's really bright and floral with very soft yeast characteristic and not high ester characteristic, you almost have to run lower and slower than you normally would in a traditional fermentation. And so we knock out around 8C on almost most of the lagers. There's a free raise step to about 10, then it's a derest anywhere between 12 and 14, depending on the product. And all that happens under spunding the D-rise, because we basically send it into horizontals with about 10, 20% left in fermentation. Part of the reason why is the majority of the yeast is still in suspension. And so when you send it over, it's not going to be, you're not going to stall. And so it's enough in there that it'll still consume its VDK, which you want. But it's enough activity that it'll actually help pressurize the tank so you don't have to charge it with purchased CO2. It gets there on its own, which is great. And so we have that kind of dialed into a timing, but it's a check with me offense, right? We believe that it's going to take this amount of time, but the lab is constantly checking those things to ensure that we're actually at spec. And so again, the lab's interaction with every step of the process is very intimate, and by design, it should be. The operator should be operating, and the lab should basically just be calling balls and strikes. And then it's just the presentation of information. We're here, we're not here. It's ready, it's not ready. And everybody kind of works around that. But as we refine our processes, as we are more and more consistent, running on timing becomes a little bit easier, but it never removes the need for the testing, because the testing has to exist so that you have a more robust data set so you can start anticipating when things are going to go wrong. right? But I know not everybody does it that way. I have a lot of friends who are like very brew by feel, like everything's sensory, and they go, I think it needs more of this, and then they just add more of it. I find that inspiring. I think it's really, really interesting. And I know that it would drive me absolutely up the wall. I am not built that way. But if it works for people, it works for people, and it works for a lot of people. And I think that that's great. This is the way that works for me.
So tell me, because you also have cylindrical fermenters here, and you could ferment your lager beer in those if you wanted to. What in a sensorial sense is the difference between Augustiner or a 3470 pale lager, Helles and Pilsner, fermented open top versus fermented in a cylindrical?
Geometry is a big part of that. Right. So yeast have to travel further to get to the top of the ferment. So they got to work harder. And so you have a little bit more yeast stress. The likelihood of autolysis is a little bit higher. But in a cylindrical, you can actually harvest the yeast. In the horizontals, it's a little bit more challenging. In the opens, you can pull a certain extent. Harvesting out of the opens is not the worst thing in the world, but it's also not the most efficient because, again, you can't apply pressure to create a tighter cone to create reuse. So yeast management becomes a serious consideration. With 3470 in a cylindrical tank, it's interesting because it actually produces less sulfur than we notice in the opens. And I think it's because the yeast are fighting harder earlier on. I think they're so happy and healthy in this environment, the open fermentation environment, that they feel more at ease to produce higher degrees of sulfur on paler lagers. And it's a combination of nutrient, oxygen, and then environment. And so I think that healthy stage is lasting longer in this than it would in a cylindrical. That was kind of vetted out through a decent amount of data, but it wasn't firmly studied. Like we didn't do a white paper on it. I kind of honestly want to at this point, but it'd just be interesting. The performance from attenuation was pretty similar. Really where you see a separation is in acetaldehyde and total sulfur production. The higher the yeast stress, usually you see a slightly higher amount of acetaldehyde. It's still below sensory threshold, but it's a measurable difference by 1.5 parts per million. And then the sulfur will fluctuate anywhere between 6 to 9.5, just shy of 10 on average in cylindricals. And sometimes if you don't let it gas off enough in that process, you start spunning too early. You can start driving a lot of it into solution. So it really is how you want to manage that whole process. Me personally, I like spunning it on like day 4, personally. But I also don't mind sulfur.
Sure.
So, some people are more sensitive to it. So if you're trying to keep it out of the beer, if you have a certain presentation that you want that you're trying to avoid, like gas out longer. But on those cylindricals, you would honestly let it warm up a little bit quicker. You probably wouldn't knock out as low and let it kind of ride a little bit harder just because it needs it. And so, but again, that's yeast to yeast, prep to prep, wort composition dependent. Darker malts carry with it less nutrient. They're not going to produce as much because they're not going to produce as much sulfur just because there isn't as much for the yeast to eat. And so unless you're backing in with nutrient, which we're not really doing, you're not going to produce as much of that because there isn't as long of a healthy reproduction stage. And so I'm sure my yeast plant manager would murder me for butchering this, but basically we continue to evolve how we look at fermentation and how we're approaching every single one of these steps to the point where I'm actually in the process of changing the Pilsner's fermentation profile based off of a couple of papers that were put out recently and off of some of the empirical data that we have now. They're small, but it's all towards the same end, right?
What kind of parameters would you be tweaking?
I'm trying to pull sulfur down a little bit. Okay. We're operating towards the high end on Pilsner right now. That while it doesn't bother me, it might bother somebody. And so
it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It really doesn't bother any of my team either. I think it's just me worrying about it.
Sure.
And probably with no need, but we'll do a side-by-side. We'll do 120 hectoliters of each. We'll measure the result. We'll do sensory against 2 of them. Then we'll probably blend them together and package it and call it a day. But that's kind of how we introduce most things. It's like test the hypothesis, observe the result. You know, you're never going to know unless you try, and there's nothing sacred, you know. Move everything, challenge everything. Like, why not? Like, I realize it's a competitive market, and I realize that like these decisions carry with it significant consequences if you're wrong. But if you're making decisions from a position of sound scientific reasoning, you're probably not going to be so wrong that the product doesn't taste right. Like, it'll probably be something that somebody drinking 6 of them side by side would say, I think this one's different. But the average consumer is going to say, this tastes like Prost Pilsner, you know? And that's kind of how we strive towards change. It's like, we want it to always be better, but if it isn't by my standard, it isn't so far away from where it is that it's going to drive any kind of response. You know, and usually nobody's mad when something's better. Like, if I replaced your car with a Ferrari, you probably wouldn't be very mad at me. Like, it's kind of is what it is.
That is 100% true. And it belies the statement you made earlier where, testing and validating, it might just be fucking around to find out. And I don't think you can call this fucking around, because there is way too much data involved and you are way too close to it. And you do have you are making informed changes that with clear hypotheses rather than just simply messing around to see what you come up with.
So some guesses are certainly better than others, that's for sure.
Well, I think that is a great place to bring this to a close. Stop by and check out their latest innovations at the G&D Chillers booth 1518 at CBC. Berkeley Yeast's Dry Tropics London offers their best-selling liquid yeast strain with the ease of use of dry yeast. Pactex handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable. Taste the flavors of indie hops at CBC booth 926 this year in Philly and sample 14 incredible beers. The Midea 50/50 Flex can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Old Orchard is your one-stop shop for fruit juice concentrates, purees, and blends. ADM brings together science and creativity to elevate taste, quality, and recipe design. Arrived brings together all the tools you need in one complete platform. And the SS Brew Pump from SS Brewtech is engineered to tackle even the messiest brew days. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you are going to CBC, shoot me an email, jbogner@beerandbrewing.com. We're doing this podcast live Monday night, April 20th at Union Transfer in Philly. And I've got some free tickets if you guys are going to be there and want to come check out the podcast. Shoot me an email. I'll send you the code. We'd love to pack the house out with podcast listeners and folks that care. We're going to have Vinny Chilurzo, Evan Price, Kelsey McNair, and some special guests coming out for a pretty awesome brewing conversation. Of course, a lot of Russian River beers and some other good stuff out there for everybody. So yeah, if you want a ticket, shoot me an email, jbogner@beerandbrewing.com. Chris, if people, you want to take it, Chris?
Oh, yes, I do.
All right,
yes,
I'll get you a ticket. I'll get you the code. No problem at all. Chris, if people want to learn more about Prost, they want to come drink the beer here at your tap room in North Glen or one of the other taps. You have multiple tap rooms in the Metro Denver area. Or if they want to find your beer out there in the digital space and learn more, where can they find you all?
So prostbrewing.com is probably the easiest place to come find the most information possible. But we are in North Glen at 351 West 104th Avenue in North Glen, Colorado. The original location is at 19th Street in Denver, Colorado. And so you can actually see where Prost started. We're in Highlands Ranch at C470 and Broadway. We're in Fort Collins off of College and, oh goodness, I want to say Mulberry.
Between Prospect and Mulberry.
Yeah. And then we have another one opening very soon out in Clear Creek. So just on the far edge of Wheat Ridge by the new Lifetime Fitness. That is going to be opening hopefully here in May, fingers crossed, as long as everything goes right with construction. But yeah, we're available in most chains, most grocery stores. We're trying as best we can to get it to as many people as possible. So we hope you enjoy it.
Good stuff. Well, I love this intersection of inspired brewing and process science. And of course, this brew house is just something. The whole system is incredible. As a connoisseur of such things, it's always fun to come sit here and see all the this beautiful brew house that you've built here.
Well, you're always welcome, and we appreciate you coming by.
And it's even better when I get to do it with a beer in hand. So it's been great talking with you about brewing, Chris. Cheers.
You as well, sir.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.